The message came on a quiet Tuesday morning, when most of Earth was still waking up to coffee and the soft hum of ordinary life. It burst across every screen, every radio, every communication device humanity had ever built. In cities and small towns, in orbital stations and distant colonies, people stopped what they were doing and watched. Ambassador Kira Dawson stood in the United Earth Defense Center, a massive underground facility buried beneath the Swiss Alps. She was 43 years old, with dark hair tied back in a simple knot and eyes that had seen too many difficult negotiations. But nothing had prepared her for this. The holographic projection filled the center of the room, showing a creature that looked like a nightmare given form. High Speaker Zorath stood 8 feet tall, with a body covered in black armor-like plates and compound eyes that reflected light like shattered glass. His mandibles clicked together as he spoke, and the translation software converted his sounds into cold, precise English. Species designation: human, Zorath began. You have been observed for 300 of your years. You have spread beyond your birth world. You have claimed 17 planets. You have built a fleet of vessels numbering over 2,000. Kira felt her stomach tighten. Around her, the other leaders of Earth's government stood frozen, watching the alien speak. The Galactic Council has decided that your species has grown beyond acceptable limits, Zorath continued. You will now submit to Council authority. You will pay tribute as all lesser species must pay. The demands appeared on screen beside the alien's image, and Kira felt the blood drain from her face as she read them. 60% of all mineral production from human worlds would go to the Council. 40% of all food grown by humanity would be shipped to Council species. And 10 million human beings would be taken each year to serve as workers for the greater civilizations. 10 million people. Every single year, taken from their homes and families to work as slaves for aliens who saw them as nothing more than useful animals. You have 7 of your days to prepare your submission, Zorath said. Resistance is not advised. The Council commands fleets beyond your counting. We have conquered 1,000 worlds. None have refused us. The hologram flickered and disappeared, leaving behind a silence so heavy it seemed to press down on everyone in the room. Admiral Henry Cole was the first to speak. He was 61 years old, with gray hair cut short and a face lined by decades of military service. He had fought in the Proxima skirmishes, when human colonies had first clashed over resources and territory. He had seen death and destruction on scales that would break most people. But his voice was steady as stone when he turned to face the assembled leaders. They expect us to bow, he said quietly. In their entire history, no species has ever refused them. They think we will be no different. Secretary General Paula Grant pressed her hands flat against the conference table. She was a small woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, elected to lead Earth's government just 2 years ago. She had expected to spend her term dealing with trade agreements and environmental policy, not the threat of galactic enslavement. What happens if we refuse? She asked. Cole did not hesitate. War, against forces that outnumber us 50 to 1 at minimum. Their technology is more advanced. Their fleets are larger. Their experience in warfare spans thousands of years. So we would lose, said Defense Minister Carlos Webb, a heavyset man with a thick beard and worried eyes. Almost certainly, Cole agreed. The room fell into silence again. Kira looked around at the faces of humanity's leaders and saw fear in every one of them. Fear of death. Fear of suffering. Fear of extinction itself. But she also saw something else. Anger, pride, a stubborn refusal to accept the unacceptable. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor. There is another question we need to ask ourselves, she said. Not whether we can win, but what kind of species we want to be. All eyes turned to her. If we submit, Kira continued, we survive. At least for now. We become servants, workers, resources to be used and discarded. Our children and grandchildren will grow up knowing that humanity bent its knee when threatened. They will learn that freedom is something that can be taken away if the enemy is strong enough. She paused, letting her words sink in. But if we refuse, if we fight even though we might lose, we send a different message. We tell the galaxy that humans do not submit. We tell our children that some things are worth dying for. We tell every species that has ever been conquered by the Council that resistance is possible. Admiral Cole nodded slowly. The ambassador raises a valid point. There is more at stake here than just our survival. There is the question of what survival means if we must purchase it with our dignity. Secretary General Grant closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, her expression had hardened into something cold and determined. How long would we need to prepare? She asked Cole. The Admiral's eyebrows rose slightly. You are considering refusal? I am considering all options. How long? Cole thought carefully before answering. 7 days is not enough time to build new ships or develop new weapons. But it is enough time to position our existing forces, to fortify key locations, to prepare the population for what may come. Then do it, Grant said. Prepare everything. Assume the worst. And when the Council's deadline arrives, we will give them our answer. The next 7 days were the most intense in human history. Across 17 worlds, people worked without sleep. Miners pulled asteroids into defensive positions. Engineers converted civilian ships into warships. Soldiers trained for battles they might not survive. And everywhere, in every language and every culture, humanity asked itself the same question. What would they do when the Council came for their answer? Kira Dawson spent those 7 days preparing the message she hoped she would never have to deliver. She wrote draft after draft, searching for the right words to tell an empire of conquerors that humanity would not kneel in the end. She realized that no speech was necessary. No complicated explanation would change anything. The Council did not want to understand humanity. They wanted submission, and submission was the one thing humanity could not give. On the 7th day, as the Council's armada appeared at the edge of the solar system like a dark cloud spreading across the stars, Kira Dawson stood beside Admiral Cole on the bridge of the carrier Defiance. She watched the enemy ships fill the view screen. More vessels than she could count. More firepower than humanity had ever faced. Are you ready? Cole asked her quietly. Kira thought of her parents, who had raised her to stand up for what was right. She thought of her sister's children, who deserved to grow up free. She thought of every human being who had ever lived and died and dreamed of something better. Yes, she said. I am ready. The Council Armada arrived with the precision of a clock striking midnight. 100,000 vessels materialized at the edge of Earth's solar system, their dark hulls blocking out the distant stars like ink spreading across paper. They came in formations that spoke of centuries of conquest, each ship knowing exactly where it belonged in the great machine of war. Aboard the command vessel, a massive structure that could have swallowed cities whole, High Speaker Zorath waited with the patience of a predator who had never known defeat. His compound eyes reflected the holographic displays that showed humanity's pitiful defenses, and his mandibles clicked together in what passed for amusement among his species. They have gathered their fleet, his aide Varith observed. Approximately 2,000 vessels. Many appear to be converted civilian craft. Desperate measures from a desperate species, Zorath replied. They will surrender within the hour. They always do. Admiral Henry Cole stood on the bridge of the carrier Defiance, surrounded by the men and women who had volunteered to form humanity's first line of defense. Captain Lisa Monroe sat at the helm, her fingers moving across the controls with practiced ease. Tactical Officer Derek Young monitored the enemy positions on his screens, calling out numbers in a voice that somehow remained calm despite what those numbers meant. 100,000 confirmed hostile vessels, Young reported. They are holding position at the system's edge. No aggressive movements yet. Cole nodded. He had known the numbers would be bad. Seeing them confirmed did not change anything. He had made his decision days ago when he had first heard the Council's demands. Some things were simply not acceptable, no matter what the consequences. Communications Officer Santos, what is the status of our broadcast network? Maria Santos looked up from her station. She was young, barely 30, with quick hands and quicker thinking. All channels are open, Admiral. We can broadcast to the entire fleet, all human colonies. And on frequencies the Council will certainly intercept. Good. When the time comes, I want the entire galaxy to hear what we have to say. The wait was not long. Within minutes, a communication request came from the Council flagship. Young announced it with a slight tremor in his voice that he quickly controlled. They are hailing us, Admiral. The High Speaker is requesting visual communication. Cole straightened his uniform. He was aware of every eye on the bridge watching him, aware of the billions of humans across 17 worlds who would soon learn their fate. He thought of his daughter Angela, who served on a patrol ship near Mars. He thought of his wife, who had died 5 years ago and never had to see this day. He thought of what she would have wanted him to do. Open the channel, he ordered. All frequencies. Every ship, every colony, every listening post. Everyone hears this. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the High Speaker in all his terrible majesty. Zorath's black armor plates gleamed under the cold lights of his bridge. Behind him, representatives of the Council's 12 ruling species watched with expressions of boredom and contempt. They had done this many times before. They knew how it ended. Humans, Zorath began, his translated voice echoing across the bridge. Your time has expired. Your 7 days are complete. You will now speak the words of submission, and your species may yet find purpose in serving the greater civilizations of this galaxy. Cole felt a strange calm settle over him. The fear that had been gnawing at his stomach for 7 days suddenly vanished, replaced by something harder and colder. He clasped his hands behind his back and met the alien's compound eyes without flinching. High Speaker Zorath, he said, his voice carrying clear and strong. I speak on behalf of the United Earth Government and the people of all human worlds. Zorath's mandibles clicked impatiently. Proceed with your submission. On behalf of every human being who has ever lived, Cole continued. Every human being who lives now, and every human being who will ever live in the future. He paused. The silence stretched across the void of space. Across 100,000 kilometers of nothing. Across the countless light years to distant colonies where humans held their breath and waited. And then Admiral Henry Cole smiled. It was a thin smile, cold and sharp as a blade. It was the smile of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything left to fight for. No. The word hung in the silence like a gunshot. On the Council flagship, Zorath's antennae twitched. The representatives behind him shifted in their seats, exchanging confused glances. In all their centuries of demanding tribute, in all their thousands of conquests, no species had ever simply said no. I do not understand, Zorath said slowly. You cannot refuse. Your forces are insignificant. Your technology is primitive. You stand alone against the greatest power this galaxy has ever known. You have nothing. Cole's smile widened. That is where you are wrong, High Speaker. We have something your council has never encountered in all its years of conquest. We have spite. We have stubbornness. And we have a very long memory for anyone who tries to make us kneel. On the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Monroe let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Beside her, Young's hands were shaking, but his eyes were bright with something that might have been pride or might have been madness. It was hard to tell the difference. Maria Santos cut the transmission on Cole's signal. The view screen went dark, and for a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the ship's systems. "Well," Monroe said quietly, "I suppose we have done it now." Cole turned to face his crew. They looked back at him with expressions that ranged from terror to exhilaration to simple determination. They knew what was coming. They knew the odds. And not one of them had asked to be somewhere else. "All ships, battle formation," Cole ordered, his voice ringing across the fleet-wide channel. "We are going to teach this galaxy what that word really means." Across the solar system, humanity moved. Ships that had been hiding behind asteroids powered up their engines. Defense platforms that had been playing dead came alive with targeting solutions. Men and women who had never expected to be soldiers checked their weapons one final time and prepared to fight. On Earth, in cities and villages and remote outposts, people watched the news feeds with tears streaming down their faces. They did not know if they would survive the next hour. They did not know if humanity would still exist by morning. But they knew one thing for certain. They were not slaves. They would never be slaves. And if they had to die to prove that, then they would die standing rather than live on their knees. The Council fleet began to move. 100,000 vessels advancing toward a species that had dared to refuse. High Speaker Zorath watched from his command chair, his compound eyes unreadable. "They are either very brave or very stupid," Vareth said beside him. Zorath considered this for a moment. "It does not matter which," he replied. "Either way, they will be destroyed. And when we have finished with their fleet, we will take their worlds and their people. And we will make them regret this moment of foolish defiance for the rest of their lives." But deep in his ancient mind, in a place he would never acknowledge, the High Speaker felt something he had not experienced in centuries. It was small and cold and unwelcome dot. It was doubt. The first shots of the Battle of Sol were fired at exactly 11 minutes past midnight, Earth time. A Council destroyer moved too close to a human mining platform near Jupiter, and a gunner named Pete Lawson pulled the trigger on a railgun that had been built for breaking apart asteroids. The shot punched through the destroyer's shields and carved a burning hole. Through its engine room. Pete Lawson became the first human to kill an enemy in the war for humanity's survival. He would not be the last. The Council expected the battle to last 6 hours at most. Their admirals had calculated the numbers with cold precision. 100,000 ships against 2,000. Superior technology against primitive weapons. Experienced crews against untested soldiers. The math was simple. Humanity would break, scatter, and beg for mercy within half a day. They did not understand what they were fighting. Lieutenant Commander Jake Preston led the first wave of attack fighters out of the asteroid belt. His squadron had nicknamed themselves the Angry Bees, and they flew craft that had been built for speed rather than armor. They were fragile things, barely more than engines with guns attached, designed to sting hard and fast before the enemy could swat them down. "All wings, stay together," Preston ordered over his radio. "Pick your targets and make them count. We do not have enough ammunition to waste." They hit a Council destroyer group at full speed, weaving between enemy fire with moves that should have been impossible. 3 pilots died in the first 30 seconds, their ships exploding into brief flowers of flame that vanished in the vacuum. But the rest pressed on, pouring fire into engine ports and weapon systems, crippling 2 destroyers before the Council. Fighters could respond. Preston pulled out of his attack run with his ship smoking from a dozen near misses. Behind him, the crippled destroyers drifted helplessly, their crews scrambling to contain the damage. That is for demanding tribute, he snarled into his radio. Anyone else want to try? On the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral Cole watched the battle unfold across a dozen holographic displays. Red icons marked human ships. Blue icons marked the enemy. There were so many blue icons that they blurred together into a solid wall of threat. We are losing ships faster than projected, Tactical Officer Young reported, his voice strained. 37 destroyers down in the first hour. 12 frigates. The carrier Independence is reporting critical damage. Cole nodded. He had expected this. The numbers did not lie, and the numbers said humanity should already be dead. But the numbers did not account for something the Council had never measured. They did not account for how hard humans were willing to fight when everything they loved was at stake. Ordered the Independence to fall back, Cole said. Redistribute her fighters to the remaining carriers. And tell Captain Price that her time has come. Commander Amanda Price had been waiting on the lunar defense stations for 3 days, watching the battle approach with grim determination. She was 47 years old, a career soldier who had joined the military to see the stars and ended up defending humanity's doorstep. She had known from the beginning that her position would be the first major target once the Council pushed past the outer defenses. The assault came like a wave of metal and fire. Thousands of Council ships descended on the moon, their weapons tearing into the defense platforms with terrible efficiency. Price watched her people die, watched her stations burn, and felt something cold and hard settle into her heart. All stations, this is Commander Price, she said into her radio. They are going to breach our lines. We cannot stop them. Around her, the surviving crew of Lunar Station 7 looked at her with fear in their eyes. They had fought for 11 hours straight. They had seen friends die in explosions and decompression and desperate hand-to-hand combat. They knew what was coming. But we can make them pay for every inch, Price continued. When they breach this station, I am going to overload the fusion reactors. Anyone who wants to leave, I will not blame you. Find an escape pod and get out. But if you want to stay and give these bastards something to remember, stay with me. No one left. Not a single person moved toward the escape pods. The Council Marines breached Lunar Station 7 at exactly 1400 hours. They expected to find broken defenders ready to surrender. Instead, they found Amanda Price standing in front of the reactor controls with a dead man switch in her hand and a smile on her face. Welcome to the moon, she said. The explosion took out Station 7 and 4 Council cruisers that had moved in too close. The flash was visible from Earth, a brief new star that burned for a moment and then faded into darkness. Similar stories unfolded across the solar system. Captain Marcus Lane rammed his damaged frigate into a Council carrier's hangar bay, disabling the massive ship and allowing 3 transport vessels full of civilian refugees to escape. He sent one final message before the impact. Tell my wife I love her. Dr. Victor Park was a scientist who had never held a weapon in his life. When Council Marines stormed his research station on Titan, he met them with a mining laser in one hand and a fire extinguisher in the other. He killed 2 before they brought him down, and the Marines who found his body reported that he had died with his teeth bared in defiance. 16-year-old. Anna Walsh was supposed to be evacuating with the other civilians when her transport was hit by enemy fire. Instead of waiting to die, she climbed into a maintenance suit and manually sealed the hull breach, saving 43 lives. She lost 3 fingers to frostbite and never stopped smiling. The battle lasted not 6 hours but 60 days. Humanity lost 17,000 ships. 12 million soldiers died. The colony on Europa was destroyed completely, its dome shattered and its people scattered into the void. 3 orbital habitats fell, their wreckage forming new rings around Earth that would persist for centuries. the cost was beyond calculation. The wound would take generations to heal. Families across 17 worlds would forever remember the empty chairs at their tables, the names that would never be called again. But when the smoke cleared and the wreckage settled into silent orbits around the sun, humanity still stood, and the Council had lost 40,000 ships. High Speaker Zorath stared at the casualty reports for a long time, his compound eyes moving across numbers that should have been impossible. 40,000 vessels destroyed or disabled. Millions of Council soldiers dead. More losses in 60 days than the Council had suffered in the previous 500 years combined. How? He whispered. They are primitives. Animals. How can animals fight like this? His aide Verith spoke carefully, knowing that the wrong words could cost him his life. High Speaker, perhaps we underestimated them. Perhaps they are not what we assumed. Zorath turned his terrible gaze on his aide. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he looked back at the view screen, where the distant lights of human ships still burned against the darkness. Pull our forces back, he ordered. We need to reconsider our approach. It was not a retreat. The Council did not retreat. But as the surviving Council ships began to withdraw, as humanity watched its enemies finally, impossibly back away, a single thought spread across every human world. They had done it. Against every odd, against every prediction, against the weight of 1,000 conquered civilizations. Humanity had made the mighty Council bleed. And somewhere in the wreckage of Lunar Station 7, in the drifting debris of the Independence, in the coal graves of 12 million soldiers who had given everything, that simple word still echoed. No. Word of humanity's stand spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. It traveled on stolen transmissions and whispered messages, on the lips of traitors who had seen the battle's aftermath and the stories of escaped slaves who had nothing left to fear. The Council tried to contain it. They blocked communications, punished anyone caught spreading the news, and insisted that humanity's resistance was a minor setback that would soon be crushed. But rumors are harder to kill than people, and this rumor carried something more powerful than information. It carried hope. On the planet Vora, where the bird-like Vorani had lived as servants for 200 years, a female named Cerise gathered her people in the ruins of an old temple. She was old by Vorani standards, her feathers faded from bright blue to soft gray. But her voice was strong as she spoke to the crowd. For 7 generations, we have told ourselves that resistance is impossible, she said. We have taught our children to bow their heads and accept their chains. We have forgotten that we were once a proud species who flew among the stars by our own power. The gathered Vorani shifted nervously. Speaking like this was dangerous. Council overseers could be listening. Punishment for rebellion was swift and terrible. But now, Ceres continued, a species younger than our grandchildren has shown us the truth. The humans were told to submit. They were told they could not win. They were told they had no choice. She spread her wings wide, and for a moment she looked like the warrior queens of Vorani legend. And they said no. The uprising began that night. Across 7 Vorani worlds, slaves who had been broken for centuries rose up against their masters. They had no weapons, no training, no plan beyond the desperate need to be free. Many died in those first terrible hours, but many survived. And they fought on. The Keth were next. They were massive beings, their skin like living stone, bred by the Council for centuries to serve as shock troops and heavy laborers. They had been told they were too stupid to govern themselves, too violent to be trusted with freedom. A Keth named Granite had always believed the lies. He had served the Council faithfully, crushing rebellions and building monuments to glory that was not his own. But when he heard what the humans had done, something shifted in his ancient heart. He remembered his grandmother's stories of a time before the Council, when the Keth had lived free on their mountain world. He remembered the old songs that were forbidden now, the ones about pride and honor and dying on your feet. Granite killed his overseer with his bare hands. It was the first free choice he had made in his entire life. It would not be the last. 3 months after the Battle of Seoul, Admiral Henry Cole stood in the ruins of what had once been the New York spaceport. The facility had been badly damaged during the fighting, its towers crumbling and its runways cracked by weapons fire. But today, for the first time since the war began, it was welcoming visitors. Ambassador Kira Dawson stood beside him, watching as ships descended through Earth's atmosphere. They were not human ships. Their designs were strange, their markings unfamiliar, but the messages they broadcast were clear. We are here to help. The Varani came first, their elegant vessels settling onto the damaged runways with surprising grace. Cerise emerged from the lead ship, her gray feathers ruffling in Earth's wind. She was smaller than Cole had expected, barely reaching his shoulder, but she carried herself like a queen. "Ambassador Dawson," Cerise said, inclining her head in a Varani gesture of respect. "We have traveled far to meet the species that taught us how to say no." Kira returned the bow. "You honor us with your presence, and with your sacrifice. We have heard reports of the uprising on your worlds." "Many have died," Cerise acknowledged. "Many more will die before this is over. But we would rather die fighting than live another generation as slaves." She made a sound that might have been a laugh. "We learned that from you." Behind her, more ships descended. The Keth arrived in vessels that looked like flying fortresses, their stone-skinned crews emerging with weapons they had taken from their former masters. The Luminari came in ships of light and crystal, their translucent bodies glowing with colors that had no names in human language. The Drell came in ancient vessels that had been hidden for centuries, waiting for a moment that had finally arrived. General Kate Walsh had taken command of Earth's ground forces after the previous commander died defending Berlin. She was a practical woman with no patience for diplomacy, but even she had to admit that watching former enemies become allies was something special. "This is going to be a nightmare to coordinate," she muttered to Cole as Keth. Warriors tried to communicate with human soldiers through a translator that kept malfunctioning. Half of them do not speak each other's languages. Some of them were killing each other a week ago. "Then we have work to do," Cole replied. "Get them talking. Get them training together. Get them ready for what comes next." What came next was the Council's response. High Speaker Zorath had spent 3 months preparing for his revenge. He had gathered every available ship, called in favors from species who owed the Council debts, and built an armada that made his first fleet look small. 200,000 vessels moved toward human space, commanded by Zorath himself. "They have gathered allies," Vareth reported as they approached the solar system. "The Varani, the Keth, several minor species. Perhaps 50,000 vessels in total." "It does not matter," Zorath said. "We still outnumber them 4 to 1. And this time, we will not underestimate their willingness to die." The Battle of the Kuiper Belt was the largest military engagement in the history of the galaxy. Over 3 million ships clashed in the icy darkness at the edge of human space, their weapons lighting up the void like a new constellation. Human ingenuity combined with Varani speed and Keth strength in ways the Council had never seen. Small human fighters flew in formation with Varani scouts, using the bird species' superior reflexes to dodge fire while human weapons struck back. Keth warships absorbed damage that would have destroyed lesser vessels, their stone hulls shrugging off attacks while they closed to devastating range. Admiral Cole commanded from the Defiance, which had been repaired and upgraded with technology from 6 species. His crew now included Varani navigators, Luminari communication specialists, and a Keth engineer who could fix anything by hitting it hard enough. All forces, hold the line, Cole ordered as the Council fleet pressed forward. Do not give them an inch they do not pay for in blood. The battle lasted 7 months. It stretched across billions of kilometers of space, from the frozen outer reaches of the solar system to the asteroid belt and beyond. Both sides lost hundreds of thousands of ships. Both sides lost millions of soldiers. But the Council had never faced an enemy that simply refused to break. Captain Lisa Monroe died on the 3rd month, ramming her damaged cruiser into a Council command ship that was about to destroy a refugee transport. Jake Preston died on the 5th month, leading a suicide attack that bought time for wounded ships to escape. Granite the Keth died on the 6th month, holding a boarding position against 200 Council Marines while human engineers repaired a critical system behind him. They died, and others took their places. They fell, and their comrades stepped forward. The Coalition lost and lost and lost, but it never stopped fighting. On the 7th month, Captain Monroe's replacement reported something that made Cole's heart stop. Admiral, Council forces are falling back. Across the entire front. They are retreating. Cole stared at the tactical display. The blue icons that had seemed endless were pulling away, withdrawing toward the edge of the system. They were not regrouping. They were leaving. Pursue them, Cole ordered, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion. Do not let them regroup. This ends when we say it ends. As the Coalition forces gave chase, driving the Council remnants back toward their own space, Cole allowed himself a moment to simply breathe. Around him, his bridge crew was cheering, embracing, crying. They had done the impossible. They had won. Ceris's voice came over the communication channel, her Varani words translated into English. Admiral Cole, the Varani people wish to formally thank humanity for this victory. Cole shook his head slowly. It was not humanity's victory alone. It belonged to everyone who refused to bow. Everyone who said no. There was a pause. Then Ceris replied, her voice carrying a warmth that transcended species and language. Then it is a victory for the free. High Speaker Zorath stood before the Council one final time. The chamber was half empty now. Several species had abandoned the Council entirely, choosing to throw their fortunes in with the upstart Coalition rather than remain tied to a sinking ship. Others had been too badly damaged by the war to send representatives. The great gallery that had once held the rulers of 1,000 worlds now felt hollow and cold. We have failed, Zorath said, his voice flat and empty. His antennae hung limp, and his compound eyes had lost their sharp, predatory gleam. For the first time in our history, we have been defeated by a species we deemed inferior. The remaining representatives shifted in their seats. Some looked angry, others afraid. A few simply looked tired, worn down by years of a war that had consumed everything. We underestimated them, Zorath continued. We saw their short lives and thought they were impatient. We saw their small bodies and thought they were weak. We saw their many nations and thought they were divided. He paused, looking around the chamber at the faces of beings who had ruled the galaxy for millennia. We were wrong about everything. The armistice negotiations took place on neutral ground, a space station that had been constructed specifically for the purpose. It floated in the unclaimed void between Coalition and Council space, a fragile bubble of diplomacy in a universe that had seen too much war. Ambassador Kira Dawson led the human delegation. She looked older than she had been at the start of the war, her dark hair now streaked with gray, her face lined by years of stress and grief. But her eyes remained sharp, and her voice was steady as she faced the Council, representatives across the negotiating table. Beside her sat Ceris of the Varani, Granite's successor Stone of the Keth, and representatives of the 9 other species that now flew under the Coalition banner. They had come together in war. Now they would try to build a peace. The new council speaker was a politician named Tharos, younger and less aggressive than Zorith, who had been quietly removed from power after the defeat. Tharos had the difficult task of preserving what remained of council authority while acknowledging the new reality of the galaxy. "We propose a truce," Tharos offered. "A return to the situation before the conflict began. We will keep our remaining territories. You will keep yours. Borders will be sealed. Neither side will cross." Kira shook her head slowly. "That is not good enough." Theris's eyes widened. "Surely you cannot be serious. Your coalition has suffered terrible losses. Your species nearly faced extinction. You cannot possibly wish to continue this war." "You are right," Kira agreed. "We have lost millions of lives. We have lost ships and colonies, and years that we can never get back. The cost has been beyond anything we could have imagined when we first said no to your demands." She leaned forward, and something in her expression made Tharos lean back in his seat. "But we would do it again tomorrow if we had to. That is what you still do not understand about us. We do not fight because we think we will win. We fight because some things are worth fighting for, regardless of the odds." Stone of the Keth rumbled in agreement, his rocky voice like distant thunder. "Freedom, dignity, the right to live as we choose." Cerise spread her wings slightly, the Varani gesture of emphasis. "The right to look at anyone in the universe and say no when they try to take what is ours." Tharos was silent for a long moment. Around him, his fellow council representatives exchanged uncertain glances. They had ruled through fear for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to face opponents who simply were not afraid. "What do you want?" Tharos asked finally. The negotiations lasted 3 weeks. They argued over territory, over reparations, over the fate of species that had been caught between the two powers. There were moments when everything nearly fell apart, when old hatreds and fresh wounds threatened to send both sides back to war. But in the end, they reached an agreement that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. The council would cease all demands for tribute. They would recognize coalition sovereignty over the territories it controlled. And they would sign a new galactic charter that prohibited the enslavement or subjugation of any sentient species that it was not perfect. It was not justice for the centuries of oppression that had come before, but it was a start. Admiral Henry Cole watched the signing ceremony from Earth, sitting in the small garden behind his house. He had retired from military service after the war, his body too battered and his spirit too weary to continue. He walked with a cane now, a reminder of injuries sustained in the final battle. And he spent most of his days tending to his flowers and thinking about the people he had lost. His daughter, Angela, stood beside him, watching the broadcast on a portable screen. She had earned her own reputation during the war, rising from lieutenant commander to captain through a combination of skill and terrible necessity. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn determination. "Do you think it will hold?" she asked quietly. Cole considered the question for a long time. Across the galaxy, former slaves were rebuilding their worlds. Former masters were adapting to a new reality. And humanity, the species that had been dismissed as primitives playing with technology they did not understand, stood at the center of it all. "Maybe," he said finally. "Maybe not. There will be challenges ahead. Old resentments. New conflicts. The Council still has power, and there are beings out there who will never accept what has happened." "That does not sound very hopeful." Cole smiled. The same thin, dangerous smile that had become famous across 100 worlds. "It is not supposed to be hopeful. Hope is easy. What matters is what we do when hope runs out." He gestured at the screen, where representatives of a dozen species were signing documents that would reshape the galaxy. "We showed them something that matters more than hope. We showed everyone that when someone comes to take what is yours, when someone tries to make you kneel, When the entire universe tells you that you have no choice but to submit, you always have a choice. You can always say no, Angela finished. Exactly. Cole leaned back in his chair, watching the sun set over a planet that had come so close to enslavement. And once you say it, once you really mean it, no power in the universe can make you take it back. Above them, the night sky began to appear, filled with stars and the lights of coalition ships that patrolled the borders of free space. It was a fleet forged in defiance, crewed by species that had chosen death over submission, sailing toward a future that no one had dared to imagine. Somewhere in the archives of the Galactic Council, in the records that would be studied and debated for millennia to come, a new entry had been added. It described a species called humanity, and it said, when asked to surrender, the humans refused. When told they could not win, they fought anyway. When offered survival through submission, they chose possible extinction through resistance. They are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not the most advanced. They do not live the longest, or think the fastest, or build the greatest machines, but they are perhaps the most dangerous species ever encountered. Not because of their weapons, not because of their technology, not because of their numbers, or their resources, or their strategic position. They are dangerous because they would rather die free than live as slaves. And that, in the end, made them impossible to defeat Dot in his garden on Earth. Admiral Cole closed his eyes and listened to the sounds of a world at peace. He thought of everyone who had died to make this moment possible. He thought of the word that had started everything, the simple syllable that had changed the course of galactic history. No. Such a small word. Such an enormous meaning. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the coalition ships sailed on through the darkness, that word continued to echo across the galaxy. A reminder and a warning and a promise all at once. Never again.